The rope creaked before Evelyn even saw it, and the sound alone nearly sent her to her knees. It was a low, groaning sound, the kind wood and hemp made when strained against their own weight, and to her terrified ears it was the whisper of death itself. The gallows stood tall in the center of the dusty town square, a wooden skeleton silhouetted against a sky bleeding red with the setting sun. The day was ending, and with it, so was she. Her wrists were bound in rough hemp, the fibers digging into her skin, and each step forward was forced by the iron grip of the deputy at her elbow. Her boots scraped across the dry earth, the sound lost in the rising murmur of the crowd. Dozens of faces pressed in from every side, hard eyes gleaming with judgment, lips curling with satisfaction at the spectacle about to unfold. They called her a thief, a liar, a witch. Evelyn Hart didn't even know which crime the sheriff had chosen to condemn her for, only that her voice had never been enough to save her. Women like her, alone and without protection in the unforgiving West, didn't survive by truth. They survived by silence, by lowering their gaze, by hoping the men who carried the law in their belts and their rifles in their hands might look past them. But she hadn't survived. She had been marked. Someone in the crowd spat at her feet, the glob of saliva mixing with dust. Hang her. A man barked, his voice carrying the stink of whiskey and hate. A woman clutched her child closer, as though Evelyn were some kind of wild animal to be kept at bay. The Lord's justice. Another shouted, his Bible clutched high above his head. The voices melded together into a storm, pressing in on her from every direction, crushing what little breath she still had left. The gallows ladder loomed ahead. Rough planks of wood stained darker where blood had dried in years past. Evelyn's knees buckled at the sight. Her chest rose and fell too quickly, the world swimming in and out of focus. The deputy jerked her forward, forcing her to climb. Each step was a battle against the trembling of her body, against the certainty that she was walking to her own end. Above her, the sheriff stood waiting. His face was carved from stone, hard and unforgiving, his eyes shaded beneath the brim of his hat. He adjusted the noose with a casualness that made Evelyn's stomach turn. He had done this before too many times, and it had never cost him a night's sleep. To him, she was nothing but another body, another lesson to the town that his word was law. The rope swung lazily in the hot evening air, its frayed end brushing her cheek as she was shoved onto the platform. Evelyn recoiled, her heart lurching violently in her chest. She could taste the copper of fear on her tongue. Her mind screamed for a miracle, for something, anything, that could stop this. But no miracle came. Only the sheriff's steady voice, booming over the restless crowd. By the authority of this town and by God's will, this woman will hang. Let her fate be a warning to the rest of you. The mob roared its approval. Evelyn's vision blurred with tears. She was 22 years old, her life little more than a string of hardship and fleeting joys. Yet even in those final moments, she clung to fragments of memory, her mother humming an old hymn while washing clothes by the creek, the smell of lilacs in the spring, the feel of sunlight warming her bare arms as a child. She tried to hold on to them as the sheriff tightened the noose around her neck. The coarse hemp scratched her skin, heavy and choking even before it bore her weight. Evelyn's legs trembled so violently she feared they would give way before the trapdoor opened. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps, every inhale rasping against the rope's fibers. Around her, the townspeople watched in silence now, their hunger satisfied, their anticipation sharpened. The sun dipped lower, staining the horizon in blood and fire. Shadows stretched long across the square, the heat of the day giving way to the cool promise of night. And there she stood, Evelyn Hart, condemned by lies and hatred, with no one to speak her name kindly in that crowd, no one to hold her hand as death reached for her. Her heart pounded like war drums in her ears. She was alone, utterly alone. Or so she believed, because in the space between the sheriff's words and the pulling of the lever, something shifted in the air. The crowd's attention faltered. A silence fell, brief but electric, as though the earth itself had paused to listen. And then Evelyn saw him. Through the sea of faces, a figure was moving forward. He was not one of them. He carried no Bible, no rifle, no badge. His skin was bronze from the sun, his chest bare, muscles carved like stone beneath the fading light. Long black hair brushed his shoulders, adorned with beads and bone. And his eyes, dark, unyielding, were locked on hers, for a single breath. Evelyn forgot the rope. She forgot the gallows. She forgot her death, because in those eyes she saw something stronger than the hatred of the mob. She saw a promise, and deep inside her trembling heart, the tiniest spark of hope flared to life. The sheriff's fingers twitched near the revolver on his hip as the crowd's muttering grew louder. Evelyn's knees weakened, and for a moment she thought she might faint right there on the platform. But then she saw him clearly, the man. Pushing through the sea of angry faces, each step deliberate, as though no one in that square could deny him passage. The mob recoiled, some out of fear, others out of disgust. "Savage," one man hissed, his knuckles white as he gripped a torch. A woman clutched her daughter, pulling her back from his path as though his shadow alone might taint the child. Yet no one dared move against him. He carried no weapon in hand, but the weight of his presence was weapon enough. Evelyn couldn't tear her gaze away. His chest was bare, muscles cut hard by years of battle and survival, glistening with the faint sheen of sweat from the desert sun. His long black hair fell over his shoulders, catching the dying light, and the beads and bone jewelry at his throat rattled softly as he walked. His dark eyes locked onto hers, steady and unyielding, and in that single glance she felt something. She hadn't felt in days, something she thought was already lost. Hope. The sheriff's voice snapped across the square. "Hold it right there." His hand rested on the revolver now, thumb grazing the hammer. "This is no place for you. Turn around before I bury you in the dust." The warrior didn't stop. He mounted the first step of the gallows platform, his movements slow and deliberate, a silent defiance in each stride. The boards groaned beneath his weight as he reached the top. The crowd erupted in shouts, a storm of rage and fear. Evelyn could barely breathe. She expected a gunshot at any moment, the thunder crack of iron and powder tearing the world apart. But instead, silence fell again. A kind of silence that felt heavy, like the desert just before a storm breaks. The warrior stood before them all, tall and unshaken, his gaze fixed on Evelyn. When he spoke, his voice rolled through the square like low thunder, deep and commanding. "She is not yours," he said, his accent rough but his words clear. "She is mine." A gasp rippled through the mob. Evelyn's heart lurched in her chest. Mine? Her breath hitched, her thoughts spinning. What could he mean? She had never seen this man before, had she? Yet the way his eyes held hers, fierce and unyielding, it was as though he had known her all her life. The sheriff spat to the side, his lips curling into a sneer. "Yours? She's a condemned criminal. This town's justice will see her hang before the sun is gone. Step aside before I string you up next to her." The warrior's jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. Slowly he raised his chin, the firelight from the mob's torches casting sharp shadows across his face. "No rope will take her," he said. "Not tonight, not ever. I will carry her where death cannot follow." The crowd erupted. Angry cries, curses and shouts of outrage filled the air. Someone hurled a rock, which clattered harmlessly against the gallows frame. The sheriff yanked his revolver free, leveling it square at the warrior's chest. Evelyn's breath froze in her lungs. One shot. Just one. and it would all be over. The man who had dared to speak for her would fall dead at her feet. But the warrior didn't move. His stillness was more defiant than any threat, and in that moment Evelyn felt her fear shift into something else. The noose around her neck suddenly seemed less certain, less final, as if fate itself had been interrupted by his arrival. "Get him down," the sheriff barked, his voice breaking the fragile quiet. Deputies moved forward, their hands on batons and rifles. The mob surged like a tide, their rage seeking to swallow the intruder whole. And yet, even as danger closed in from every side, the warrior kept his gaze fixed on Evelyn. His eyes were dark pools of certainty, and though his words had been few, she felt them echo inside her chest. "She is not yours. She is mine." Her mind whirled. What did it mean? Why had he chosen her, of all people to speak for, to claim? She didn't know whether to be afraid of him or to cling to him as the only lifeline in a world that had already turned its back on her. The sheriff cocked the hammer of his revolver, the sharp click ringing through the night. Evelyn's knees buckled as tears stung her eyes. Death was seconds away, his or hers, perhaps both. And then, in the heat of that deadly silence, she felt it, the shift of fate. The rope had been ready. The crowd had demanded blood. But this stranger, this warrior with the eyes of stone and fire, had stepped between her and the abyss. Evelyn's heart pounded in her ears as one truth settled deep within her. Whatever happened next, she would never again be alone in this fight. The air in the square grew heavy, every breath thick with dust, sweat, and fear. The sheriff's revolver gleamed in the torchlight, its barrel steady as it aimed square at the warrior's chest. The mob behind him hissed and growled like a pack of wolves, their anger barely contained. And still, the warrior didn't move. Evelyn's heart thundered inside her chest. The rope scratched her throat, every shallow breath rasping against its rough fibers. She thought she had been prepared for death, resigned, even, but now, with this stranger standing before her, everything inside her screamed that she wasn't ready. Not yet. Not like this. The warrior raised his head slowly, his voice rolling, deep and unyielding, like thunder echoing through a canyon. "She is not yours. She is mine." The words struck the air like a hammer, silencing even the cruelest jeers. The crowd gasped, muttering among themselves. Evelyn's stomach flipped. His? What could he possibly mean? She didn't know this man, had never spoken to him, never crossed paths with him. And yet, the conviction in his voice shook her to the core, as though he were speaking some truth she had simply never known. The sheriff's jaw tightened. He spat into the dirt, his face twisted with disdain. "She's a condemned woman," he snarled. "No one claims her. She hangs by the law of this town and by God's own justice. Get down, or you'll die beside her." But the warrior didn't flinch. He stepped closer, his shadow falling across Evelyn where she stood bound in the noose. The crowd shouted. In outrage, a man's voice cutting through the din. "Savage thinks he can steal her." Another spat. "Hang them both." The square roared with fury, but the warrior's voice cut through it all, calm and steady. "No rope will take her," he said, his gaze locked firmly on Evelyn's eyes. "Not tonight, not ever. I will carry her where death cannot follow." Evelyn's breath caught, her throat tightening against the rope. His words washed over her like a vow, heavy and unshakable, and for the first time since her arrest, she felt the noose loosen not on her neck, but on her soul. The sheriff cocked the revolver, the metallic click sharp and final. "That's enough," he barked. "You got 3 seconds to walk out of here alive." His deputies shifted in place, rifles half raised, uncertain whether to fire on command or wait for the crowd's judgment. The mob's energy surged again, desperate for blood. Some cried for the warrior's death. Others demanded Evelyn's swing. Torches waved, Shadows danced across the gallows, and Evelyn felt herself teetering on the edge of despair. But then the warrior did something she didn't expect. Slowly, he reached for his chest, his fingers brushing the beads and bones strung around his neck. He pulled a single feather long, black and glistening from the necklace, and without hesitation, he pressed it into Evelyn's bound hands. His fingers brushed hers for only a second, but the warmth of his skin shot through her like fire in the veins. "This feather," he murmured, loud enough for only her to hear, "is life. While you hold it, death cannot touch you." Evelyn stared at him, her heart stumbling wildly. The feather was light as air, but in her palm it felt heavier than the noose itself. Was this madness? Was he deluded? Or was he truly what he seemed, a force larger than the crowd, larger than the law, larger even than death itself? The sheriff's patience broke. He shouted, "Enough of this nonsense," and yanked the lever that would release the trapdoor. Beneath Evelyn's feet, time fractured. Evelyn gasped as her body dropped, the rope tightening around her throat. The crowd cheered, the sound of their triumph echoing in her ears. But in the same heartbeat, the warrior moved, with speed that defied belief. He slashed the rope above her head, the obsidian blade in his hand flashing black in the torchlight. Evelyn fell not into death, but into his arms, her breath tearing free in ragged sobs. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the warrior lifted her with ease, cradling her as though she weighed nothing at all. For a moment, the square froze. No sound but the crackle of torches, no motion but the dust swirling around their feet. The sheriff's revolver trembled in his grip, caught between disbelief and rage. The deputies gaped, rifles half raised, too slow to act. And in the silence, Evelyn heard his voice again, a vow whispered against the chaos. "No rope, no death. You walk with me now." The crowd erupted into screams and shouts, the night splintering into chaos. But Evelyn no longer saw them. She saw only him, the warrior who had cut her from death's noose and spoken to her not as a criminal, not as a victim, but as someone worth saving. And deep within her, something she thought long dead stirred back to life. The crowd didn't understand what had happened until it was too late. The rope snapped, Evelyn fell into strong arms, and the warrior turned with a speed that stole the breath from every witness. For a heartbeat, silence held the square, torches flickering, mouths hanging open in shock. Then chaos erupted. Stop him? The sheriff roared, his revolver firing into the night. The shot cracked like thunder, sparks exploding from the barrel, but the warrior was already moving. He leapt from the gallows platform with Evelyn clutched against him, his bare chest slick with sweat, his muscles coiled like springs. Bullets screamed past them, splinters flying as wood shattered behind him. The mob surged forward, rifles raised, fists swinging torches like clubs. Evelyn clung to the warrior, her cheek pressed against his warm skin, the scent of earth, smoke, and leather enveloping her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, every breath ragged and desperate. She had been seconds from death, and now she was running. Straight through it. From the darkness beyond the square came a sound that cut through the gunfire, the sharp whinny of a horse. The warrior whistled, a piercing note that rose above the tive. Chaos, and out of the shadows thundered a painted warhorse, black and white like smoke and snow. Its hooves pounded the earth, scattering dust and sparks as it barreled toward them. Evelyn barely had time to gasp before the warrior swung her up onto the saddle in one fluid motion, his strength lifting her as though she weighed nothing. He vaulted up behind her, his arms closing tight around her waist as the horse reared. Torches wavered, men shouted, and the sheriff fired again. The bullet whizzed so close Evelyn heard it sing past her ear. "Ride," someone screamed. "Don't. Let them escape." But the horse needed no urging. With a savage cry in his native tongue, the warrior dug his heels into its flanks, and the beast lunged forward like lightning unleashed. The square dissolved into a blur of furious faces and flailing weapons as they tore through the crowd. Man tried to block their path, rifle raised, but the horse slammed them aside with the force of a charging bull. Evelyn screamed, gripping the saddle horn until her knuckles turned white. Gunfire chased them into the night, bullets sparking against stone, thudding into wooden posts as they fled the town. Behind them, torches bobbed like fireflies as the mob gave chase on foot, their fury echoing in curses and cries. But the horse was swift, its mane whipping into the wind, its muscles rippling beneath them as it carried its riders away from death. The town fell behind quickly, swallowed by shadows. Ahead, the desert stretched wide and endless, its sands glowing silver beneath a rising moon. The air grew cooler with each pounding stride of the horse, the scent of mesquite and dust filling Evelyn's lungs. Still, she clung to the warriors, arm afraid that if she let go, the night itself would swallow her. Her body trembled not only from fear, but from the wild surge of adrenaline coursing through her veins. She turned her head slightly, her cheek brushing against his chest. He held her steady with one arm, the other gripping the reins, his dark eyes fixed on the horizon as if nothing behind them could touch him. At last, when the only sounds were the rhythmic pounding of hooves and the whisper of the desert wind, Evelyn found her voice. Her words tumbled out broken, gasping. Why did you save me?" For a long moment, he didn't answer. The desert stretched endless before them, the moonlight painting the sand in silver and shadow. Finally, his deep voice rumbled against her ear, quiet but sure, "Because death is not your path." Evelyn shivered, the weight of his words pressing into her heart. Not her path? She had been seconds from the rope, her life measured in heartbeats, yet he spoke as though fate itself had bowed to his will. She wanted to question him, to demand what he meant, but the words caught in her throat. They rode on through the night, the lights of the town fading into memory, the angry shouts of the mob swallowed by distance. Only the desert remained, vast and eternal, the stars blazing above like 1,000 watchful eyes. Evelyn's fear lingered, but beneath it, something else stirred, something dangerous, something she dared not name. The warrior's grip around her waist was firm, his body warm against her back. With each mile that carried them farther from the gallows, Evelyn felt the rope's phantom pressure ease from her throat, replaced by a new and unsettling truth. She wasn't falling into death anymore. She was falling into destiny. The night wrapped around Eliza like a cloak, its silence broken only by the pounding of her heart. She had never ridden so wildly in her life. The wind stung her face, tearing tears from her eyes, and the desert blurred into streaks of silver and shadow. The warrior's arm, firm around her waist, held her steady as the horse thundered over dry earth. Behind them, the town's torches flickered like a swarm of angry fireflies. Fading into the dark horizon, they rode until the hooves no longer sounded like war drums and the air grew heavy with the scent of river water. The warrior slowed his horse near a bend where the desert gave way to willows and reeds. The moonlight shimmered across the rippling surface, painting everything in silver. He dismounted with fluid grace, then reached up to lift Eliza down. She stumbled, her knees trembling from fear and exhaustion, but his steady hands caught her before she fell. For the first time, she looked into his face without the blinding light of fire or the chaos of the mob. His dark eyes glowed like embers beneath his long black hair, which cascaded over his broad shoulders. Beads and feathers swayed against his chest, glinting faintly in the moonlight. His presence radiated both strength and an unshakable calm that made her chest ache with confusion. He was the man who had defied the noose for her, yet she knew nothing of him, nothing but the danger he now carried her into. Why? She whispered, her voice cracking. Why would you risk death for me? For a long moment, the warrior said nothing. He crouched by the river, scooping water into his hands and drinking deeply before offering her a drink. She hesitated, but her parched throat burned, and she knelt beside him, her reflection rippling alongside his in the water. Finally, he spoke. His voice was deep, carrying the weight of stone and storm. You carry the mark of my people. Eliza blinked, startled. Your people? I don't understand. He reached for her wrist, gently but firmly, tugging at the torn sleeve of her dress. The fabric slid back to reveal a small birthmark on her skin, an unusual crescent-shaped scar just below her elbow. She had seen it all her life, a curiosity her mother had once called a kiss from the moon. His eyes darkened as he touched it reverently, like a priest touching a sacred relic. It is the sign of the moonbound, he said. A promise between your blood and mine. You were born under our sacred night, chosen before you took your first breath. Her breath caught. The words sounded like madness, yet something in the fire of his eyes made denial catch in her throat. No, she whispered, pulling back her arm. I'm just a rancher's daughter, nothing more. You are more than you believe, he replied, his jaw tight with certainty. He looked away toward the river, his hair lifting in the night. Whined. The townspeople feared you because of what you are becoming. They sense the bond. They feel the power they cannot understand. That is why they wanted you dead. Eliza's chest tightened, fear pressing harder than any noose. Bond? Power? I don't want this. I never asked for any of it. He turned back to her, his face softened by something almost tender. Nor did I, yet the path was written. And now? He reached up, lifting one of the feathers from his necklace, letting it dangle before her eyes. Now you belong to me as I to you. You are my moon bride. The words struck her like a lightning bolt. She stumbled back, heart pounding. Wildly? Bride? Her? Bound to this man she didn't know, this stranger who had torn her from death only to thrust her into another kind of fate. I don't want to belong to anyone, she cried, her voice raw. Not to them and not to you. The warrior rose slowly, towering over her, his shadow cast long in the moonlight. Yet his eyes weren't cruel. They were steady, like a storm that had already decided its course. You are afraid, he said, but fear cannot change the truth. The river carries only one current. You may fight it, but it will still take you where it flows. Eliza's knees weakened, tears burning. Her eyes, she wanted to scream at him, to deny every word. Yet deep inside, beneath the layers of fear, a strange warmth spread through her chest, an echo of recognition she could not explain. The night air grew still, the river whispering like an ancient voice. And for the first time, Eliza wondered. If she had escaped one kind of death only to walk into another one of destiny, binding, and eternal vows she was powerless to resist. The night bled slowly into dawn, a fragile pink stretching across the horizon, while the desert lay hushed like it was holding its breath. Evelyn stirred awake, the scent of smoke and sage wrapping around her. The warmth of the fire had dwindled, but what she felt was not cold. The warrior was there silent, watchful, sitting cross-legged with his obsidian blade driven into the ground before him like a stake of promise. His long black hair glistened faintly with dew, tribal jewelry rattling softly when he shifted. She watched him for a while, hidden behind the safety of her blanket. There was a calmness in him that unsettled her, like he belonged to another world, and she was trespassing in it. When he finally turned his head, their eyes met, and Evelyn's breath caught. Why save me? She whispered, her voice raw from the gallows noose. For a moment, he said nothing, then pressed his hand against his chest and tapped twice. Because, he said in halting English, your spirit, strong, not for rope. Evelyn swallowed, her heart tugging painfully. She should have been miles away by now, running until her legs gave out, but she stayed, as though bound to him by invisible threads. The warrior rose in one smooth motion and extended a hand. "Come," she hesitated. "Where?" He only nodded toward the rising sun. "Home." Reluctantly, Evelyn placed her trembling hand into his. The touch was grounding, calloused, warm, unyielding. Together, they walked through the thinning desert. Night, their shadows long and strange against the pale light dot as they climbed a ridge, Evelyn caught her breath. Below stretched a hidden canyon dotted with willow trees, a ribbon of river threading its way through, and at its heart stood a ring of lodges painted with symbols that seemed to dance in the morning glow. Smoke rose from fires, children's. Laughter echoed faintly, and the scent of herbs floated on the breeze. Her chest tightened. This was no lawless wilderness. This was sanctuary. The warrior led her down the slope, the earth soft beneath their steps. As they neared the lodges, figures emerged, elders wrapped in furs, women carrying baskets, children who ran forward before being pulled back by watchful hands. Whispers traveled like wind. Eyes, dark and piercing, studied her every movement. Evelyn felt their weight pressing down on her soul. The warrior stopped before the largest lodge, its entrance painted with a great black bird in flight. He touched his chest, then pointed to her. "She is under my spirit," he declared in his tongue. Voice ringing with conviction. The crowd murmured, some frowning, others tilting their heads curiously. An elder stepped forward, his face creased with years, his eyes deep pools of both wisdom and doubt. He studied Evelyn with an intensity that made her knees quiver. "She carries the mark of fear," the elder said slowly, switching to English for her sake. "But also the mark of fire." Evelyn's lips parted, confusion flooding her. "What does that mean?" The elder did not answer her. Instead, he turned to the warrior. "You bind yourself to her spirit, Hawk of the Night." The warrior Hawk of the Night stood, tall, chest bare, and gleaming in the sun. He did not waver. "Yes, she is mine, my eternal bride." Evelyn's heart slammed against her ribs, the world spinning. Eternal bride? Her. Fear, wonder, and disbelief twisted together, a storm she could not name. She looked at Hawk, his face unyielding, yet his eyes burned with something she had never seen in another man, a vow deeper than words. Older than time. The elder raised his hand, silencing the murmurs. "Then it is the spirits who will decide. Tonight, the fire will speak." Gasps rippled through the gathered people. Evelyn clutched the blanket tighter around her shoulders, trembling not from cold but from the weight of destiny pressing down. What had she been drawn into? And why did? Part of her, buried deep within, longed to hear what the fire would say. The wind over the desert plateau howled like a hymn of fate as the drums began. Low and steady, the beat rolled through the earth, rattling Lila's bones and quickening her pulse. She stood in the center of the circle, the entire village gathered around her. Torchlight flickered against painted faces, jewelry of feathers and bone catching the fire's glow. Children peered between their mothers' skirts. Warriors stood like carved stone, and the elders raised their hands to the heavens. Kalen, the man who had carried her through fire, fear, and blood, stepped into the circle bare-chested, the firelight, sculpting every muscle of his powerful frame. His long black hair fell loose across his shoulders, and the weight of his tribal jewelry made him seem not of this world but of legend. In his eyes burned something both fierce and tender, as though the entire desert sky had poured its light into him. Lila's heart pounded so hard she thought it might break her ribs. Bride? The word had been whispered by the women earlier when they dressed her in a simple white deerskin robe, brushing out her tangled hair and weaving feathers through it. She had laughed nervously, thinking it a cruel joke, but now As Kalen faced her before his people, she realized this was no jest. He lifted his hand to silence the drums, and the canyon fell into a hush so deep she could hear her own shallow breaths. His voice, low and resonant, carried through the night. She was about to die with fear, he said, turning slightly to let his people see the pale stranger before him. The world sought to break her, to burn her spirit into dust. But the Great Spirit guided her steps to me, and his hand pressed to his chest over the scars of old battles. I vowed she would never be broken again. A murmur rippled through the circle. The elders nodded, their eyes glinting with approval. The women murmured blessings in their native tongue. The fire crackled as though echoing the vow. Lila's lips trembled. She had not asked for this, had not dreamed of it in the darkest hours of her captivity or her flight. And yet, something inside her stirred. He had carried her from death. He had fought for her when the world turned cruel. He had given her a place to breathe again. When Kalen stepped closer, the scent of cedar smoke and earth filled her lungs. He reached for her hand. Her small, trembling hand swallowed in his scarred, powerful palm. "Lila," he said, his voice gentling now, so low it was meant only for her. "The world took much from you. Let me give you what cannot be taken." Her throat closed. Her eyes burned with tears. "And what is that?" She whispered. He bowed his head, his hair falling forward, shadows dancing across his sharp jaw. "My life, my people, my name. All of me. If you will take it, I will make you my eternal bride." Gasps shivered through the onlookers. The warriors stood taller, as though proud their leader would bind himself in such a vow. The women smiled knowingly, their eyes soft with approval. Even the children sensed the gravity of the moment and clutched one another in silence. Lila could barely speak. She was the daughter of farmers, once promised to a man who saw her as nothing but property, who left her to rot when her family died. And now, this? A warrior, fierce as the desert sun, offering not possession but protection, not chains but choice. Her voice shook, but it carried. "I was about to die with fear," she said, echoing his words. "But you made me live again. If life is to be with you, then yes. Yes, Kalen, I will be your bride." The canyon roared with the sound of approval, the drums resuming, the women ululating, warriors lifting their fists to the firelit sky. Kalen pulled her into his arms, his bare chest hot against her cheek, his strength surrounding her like the walls of a fortress. For the first time in years, she felt utterly safe. Above them, the stars spread endless and unblinking. The fire crackled higher, sparks rising like prayers. And though the world beyond the canyon was still cruel, still waiting to test them, here, in this circle of fire under the boundless western sky, she was no longer a victim. No longer alone, she was Kalen's bride. His eternal bride. And nothing, not even the endless desert winds, could take that away.